here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Well, hello there. It's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today, and I'll tell you what has got the media talking today, the prospect of potential energy blackouts. Monday to Friday, 4 p.m. till 7 p.m. If you're wondering, I'm not having that. I'm not having Dewbs & Co disrupted for anything. But I'm wondering, what do you make of all this? Is it all being blown out of proportion? Is it the media just desperate for clicks and all the rest of it? Or do you think it is a realistic probability? I want your thoughts on that tonight. And the pension triple lock. Should it be honoured? On the one hand, many pensioners are saying definitely they've worked all their lives for this. On the other side, others are asking why should younger folk who don't have inflation matching pay be responsible for maintaining the standards of pensioners? Harsh or fair? What side of the fence are you on? And strict parents. A study has shown that they could be responsible for basically changing their kids' DNA, leaving them unable to cope with life's ups and downs. Many folks, though, are saying, hang on a second, if parents were actually a bit more strict, society might be in a bit of a better place. What says you? We'll have that and more tonight, but first, the latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you. Good evening. The top story this hour on GB News. Cabinet ministers were told today they need to save taxpayers' money, but that public spending will continue to rise overall. Ministers left Downing Street this morning after the new Chancellor said their budgets needed to be cut. Jeremy Hunt says cost-cutting, though, should focus on areas which would not affect public services. Public spending currently stands at around £1 trillion a year. Well, Downing Street has hinted it may have to drop its commitment to the pensions triple lock, as Michelle was just saying. Whitehall is attempting to find several savings in its budget. The Prime Minister had previously committed to pensions seeing either an increase of 2.5%, the rate of inflation, or wages, whichever is the highest. That comes as a new Snap poll suggests. The Prime Minister Liz Truss, who's been in power for less than 6 weeks, is already facing calls to resign. The YouGov research showed that more than half of Tory members want Liz Truss to leave, and more than 80% believe she's doing a bad job. The Armed Forces Minister James Heappey told GB News Conservatives need to get on with delivering for the country.
Whilst nobody would pretend that the last 5 or 6 weeks have been the start to her premiership she would have wanted, the reality is that, yes, a mistake was made. She went too far too fast with the mini-budget as it was. But there are also a set of global economic conditions that require stability in government. There's also a security situation in Europe right now that requires stability in government. And what we must do as Conservative politicians is row in behind the Prime Minister.
Well, we caught up with voters in the Prime Minister's South West Norfolk constituency and asked them what they thought. They're not as convinced she'll last as leader.
I think she's out of her depth, really. So I think they're just delaying the inevitable. I think she's going to have to resign.
Well, the woman's lost the plot, and we're going to suffer for some of the stupid U-turns that have been put on upon us now.
The longer she's there, the bigger lead that the Labour Party will have.
Well, away from politics, it's become clear in the last hour or so that the UK government has reprimanded China's consular staff in Manchester after footage emerged on social media of a protester being assaulted by staff in its grounds. And a warning, if you're watching on television, we're about to show you images of the person being attacked. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, demanded an explanation after images circulated online showing a Hong Kong pro-democracy demonstrator being dragged into the grounds of the Chinese consulate in Manchester before, it appears, being beaten by staff. In the meeting that's taken place between the UK government and Chinese representatives, the government said it expected foreign diplomats to respect UK law and the right to peaceful protest. Beijing blamed what it described as a disturbing element illegally entering its consulate on Sunday. Police are investigating the incident. Now, British households are being warned to prepare for blackouts and cold homes potentially this coming new year. The National Grid's chief executive says the power cuts could potentially happen on really cold weekdays in January and February between the hours of 4 and 7 p.m. John Pettigrew issued the blackout warnings during the Financial Times Energy Transition Summit as he outlined what might happen if generators fail to secure enough gas from Europe to meet UK demand. And 26 climate protesters have been arrested after blocking a main road into West London. Just Stop Oil activists disrupted traffic on the A4 this morning, blocking both carriageways near Barons Court. Police eventually managed to remove them, even though some had glued themselves to the tarmac. And you may have heard in the last hour, the two Just Stop Oil activists who blocked the Dartford crossing for the past 2 days have agreed to end their protest. They'd scaled the QE2 bridge and caused traffic to stack up for around 6 miles on either side of the crossing today. They're cooperating with police, we understand, and Just Stop Oil suggesting these demonstrations will continue, though, until their demands are met. They want the government to cancel all new oil and gas extraction licences. International news, and Russia has launched new airstrikes targeting the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. 2 people were reportedly killed when missiles hit an energy plant. Ukraine says there have also been 2 missile strikes in the southeastern city of Dnipro, causing a fire and serious damage. In the north of the country, another airstrike has left a city without water or electricity. Here at home, auctioneers in Edinburgh say they are flabbergasted by the huge interest being shown in a print reproduction of Balmoral Castle painted by none other than the King. His Majesty's prints normally sell for around £400 to £600, but this particular painting from 2001 has sparked international interest and is expected to fetch far more. It's thought to be the first time a print by a reigning monarch has been auctioned, and the bidding will open on Thursday. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel, where it's time now for Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Polly. Well, I'm with you right through until 7 o'clock tonight. And keeping me company here in the studio is my panel, Matthew Wright. He's a man that we all need in our lives right now. Why? Well, he's the chair of Positive News, highlighting positive stories that matter. Are you brimming then with positive stories everywhere?
Always brimming with
Are you always
positivity,
happy and
Michelle.
upbeat?
I wouldn't say always happy, but I try to be upbeat. I think we all need to, don't you?
What a glorious job that must be, to bask in positive news every minute of the day. That would be a very welcome distraction, wouldn't it, from all the goings on in this world. Also keeping me company in the studio tonight, James Woodhousen, the author and visiting professor at London South Bank University. Hello, welcome. I've not seen you for a while. Welcome back. Always nice to have you, James. And you know the drill, don't you, on Dewbs & Co. It's not just about us three here. It's about you guys at home. What is on your mind tonight? You can get in touch with me on email. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address, or you can tweet me at gbnews or at Michelle Dewbs. Lots of you have been in touch already, not least about the topic of triple lock when it comes to pensions. Where do you stand on that? There were promises, wasn't there, made to you guys, if you are indeed receiving that pension, that it would be committed to. Alas, it seems perhaps not to be the case anymore. Where do you stand on that? Do you think the government would scrap that triple lock, or do you think, nah, they don't have it in them, they need the votes? Get in touch with me. Let me know your thoughts on all of that. And strict parents as well. Have you got kids? Were you strict? Do you think it's the making of a kid to be strict? Apparently, it's the making of them having depression and struggling with life's ups and downs. We'll get into all of that. But whoa, I can tell you are not backwards in coming forwards about your pensions. I'll be talking, by the way, to a government MP a little bit later on in the programme. So if you've got a burning question that you're shouting at your screens, tell me in my inbox. And if you're lucky, I might put it to him. Harry says, Michelle, you look like a licorice all sort tonight. I don't know if that's a compliment or a criticism, but I'll take it either way. Right, our top story then, shall we get into energy? What do we all make to this? There's lots of kind of rumourings and pontifications about whether or not we're heading for a blackout this winter. The head of National Grid says that households, we do need to be ready. Get this, though, potentially in January and February, between 4 and 7 p.m. I'm not happy with that, of course, because what do you all do between 4 and 7 p.m? Watch GBNews, not least Dewbs & Co. So we can't be having any of this. James Woodhousen, this is perhaps, some might say, one of your areas of expertise. You've written a book on energy, particularly around green energy and things like that. What do you make to all of this?
Well, I think it's very disturbing. I mean, it's fair enough for you to joke that GB News might not be on, but when we're looking at hospital equipment powered by electricity, we haven't heard a guarantee that that's going to be working between 4 and 7 in the afternoon in the coldest months of the year. I think it could be the National Grid.
Yeah, but hang on, because on that point of like hospitals and things like that, I thought that in the event of any blackout, there would be so-called critical infrastructure that was almost exempt from some of this stuff. So I would have imagined that things like hospitals and things like that would be exempt.
Well, one would hope. But, you know, with this government, the promises, like with triple lock, are not necessarily delivered, Michelle. So I haven't seen any plan for maintaining not just hospitals, but factories and all the other stuff that goes on the back of gas and on the back of fossil fuels. So it's a very worrying development. What I was going to say is they may be trying to prepare public opinion for blackouts that are not done actually at the coldest time just about in the year and when people really need heat and so on. But their own forecasting at the National Grid is very, very poor, and they're not to be trusted. I have a 2015 bar chart from the National Grid saying that microgeneration, that's solar panels and heat pumps in your home, would account for 5 gigawatts, 10 gigawatts. They were actually going up to 20, 30, 40 gigawatts. In fact, the total now for today, what they were predicting for today was 30 or 40, and we've got about 10. So that small-scale approach, which is very different from gas, has gone nowhere, and therefore I don't trust any of their forecasts about power cuts for the new year.
I'll tell you what I don't really trust. People that are trying to plant a seed in public opinion to be mindful of electricity that you use, while simultaneously, I don't know if I've got this picture to show you guys, because it was something that made me chuckle, so it did. The National Grid, they're coming out there, they're setting our expectations. I'm showing it on the screen now. They're setting our expectations that, we might have to be mindful of electricity use. Well, I don't know if you can see your screens right now. If you're listening rather than watching, you won't be able to. But this is one of their HQs lit brighter than a Christmas tree out of normal working hours. So I always am of the opinion that if you want to start dishing out advice to people, maybe follow your own advice first, and that puts you on a much better platform. Anyway, Martin, what do you think of all this?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I think the poor man is probably regretting having said this in such a public platform, because he did qualify it with, if it's extremely cold, in other words, the demand for gas is very high, and they're not going to cut off people's heating, so they're going to cut down on the gas-fired power stations. If they're long periods of windless days, so the amount of energy we can get from wind turbines falls away if supplies from the continent are interrupted. So I think he's sort of covering himself by saying there might be a slight risk.
It was quite precise with his Monday to Friday, 4 till 7. That is quite like a precise prediction.
Yeah, I have no idea why he chose those times particularly, but that's often a time when people are travelling home from work and so on. I very much doubt, picking up on James's comment, that there aren't plans in place, and I'm pretty sure there are, to keep critical infrastructure running, so that we don't have hospitals closing down in the middle of operations or whatever.
Yeah, and there's a small row brewing, I think it's in France, with some of the telecom providers. They're arguing that if in the event of a blackout, they should be regarded as critical infrastructure. And I think that there's a little bit of toing and froing going on in that country about this. So I don't think by any stretch of anyone's imagination this is anything that is just unique to the UK. Part of me just thinks, well, actually, I do respect the fact that you are contingency planning. The other part of me just thinks maybe you could do a little bit more of that contingency planning behind closed doors as opposed to overly frightening people. But where did you stand, moving on from the blackouts and just focusing on the whole energy thing more broadly, where did you stand on the U-turn that was yesterday? So, the cap, it was supposed to be for 2 years and now it's going to be 6 months. What was your view on that?
Well, I think, what Jeremy Hunt knows about energy, I'm not at all certain about. And what he knows about fuel poverty and coldness among older people and among pensions, I'm not sure about. His attack really on Kwasi Kwarteng's more generous dispensation for families in relation to energy bills indicates to me that they're going to have no compunction in more deaths from hypothermia, in more cutbacks for state expenditure, for benefits, for the public sector generally. That's what Jeremy Hunt represents.
But on energy, though, so are you saying that you think that this energy cap should have continued? So originally it was supposed to be for 2 years, and now it's going to be obviously till April. Do you think that was the right move to cut it back, or should it have been kept for 2 years?
I think it should have been kept. And they will argue, well, look, it'll be much more targeted and so on. But a bit like your question on, critical infrastructure, who decides the targeting? Who decides what's critical infrastructure to work with?
So you think 2 years was the right thing and perhaps it should have been left like that. What do you think to that, Martin?
It's interesting because it's politically riskier to say, look, we're going to end it in April, which in fact was the Labour Party's platform as well, that they'd have an energy price cap or energy price guarantee for 6 months. We don't know what energy prices are going to be like in April. If they are going to do it more intelligently, in a more intelligently targeted way, that possibly makes sense. I think part of the reason they've done this is to send a signal to the markets that we're really, really not spendthrift. We're not splashing the cash everywhere. I think that's partly why they've done it. There are people who are interested in what they call a social tariff, which is where you would charge a certain amount, an affordable amount, up to a certain use of energy, and then you charge more for profligate uses of energy. That has certain appeals. The problem with it is a lot of people living in really poorly insulated homes, a lot of people suffering from fuel poverty, as James was pointing out, actually have to use a lot of energy. Now, part of the reason for that is we've scandalously cut back on energy efficiency. We have cut back on home insulation programmes. We've cut back 90% in the last 10 years or so, since David Cameron famously remarked, I think I'm allowed to say this, we should cut the green crap. And that wiped out a lot of energy efficiency programmes, which are the sort of things that would help lift people out of fuel poverty. So I think that's been a great shame that we have failed to take advantage of the possibilities of reducing our demand for energy and therefore reducing the risk of these sort of blackouts that poor Mr. Pettigrew is now having to soften us up for.
Yeah, see, anyone that pays an electricity bill, which is pretty much all of us, quite frankly, we all like the comforting thoughts. It's like a mug of Horlicks, isn't it? This price cap for the next 2 years. It brings you an element of comfort, an element of reduced uncertainty. But I do think, on reflection, it was a little bit ill thought out, because you're making this promise in order to get political gain, get people on side. But actually, to your point, we have no idea what the energy prices are going to be doing in a year's plus time. Come April, a lot of people won't have the heating on anyway. I think April the 14th was the date that was typically turning off. I don't know why that random date stuck in my head, but it did. I think it was by April the 14th people switched.
I had it on in May. Now, does that make me profligate? Well, there are days in May when you need it.
Well, I would argue that probably, if you've got your heating on when it's not necessary, you probably are in the fortunate position of being profligate. I'm as tight as anything. Michelle, I would put my layers on.
This is moralising energy use when the culprit here is not the individual consumer. I can't work when I'm cold. I'm sorry, I work at home.
No, it's not moral. I couldn't care less if you've got your heating on, quite frankly. What I'm saying is, if you're in a position where you've got your heating on, not because it's freezing cold outside, but because you just prefer it to be warmer, then that is a choice. Some might argue it's a profligate choice. I don't really care. I personally would I've just bought this really thick onesie, like a nice, fluffy hat, it's got a hat on it, beautiful onesie that I've been putting on and taking off recently because I get too hot in it.
This is the water bottle road to energy, And
it's sensible.
It might sound sensible. It's what President Carter said about putting on a sweater back in the 70s.
Heat the human, not the home.
But, what it absolves is the government's responsibility for installing all the wind turbines that go still when there's still air that Martin referred to. So I want to know why the government has pursued net zero so ferociously that we are likely to have still days in the winter, and then we won't have electricity because of the wind turbines.
And
they're intermittent.
And do you think that that's one of the primary causes of where we are now, one of the predicaments that we're in now, because we've, some might say, blindly pursued this net zero agenda?
Well, where's the investment that's really been thought out on nuclear power, on new sources of gas, on direct current transmission from Germany, and all of the other techniques that are available to us, rather than having intermittent wind turbines, which are much more expensive than Martin will make out?
Martin, go on.
We have banned, until the recent announcement, one of the cheapest sources of electricity generation, one of the cheapest, and it's not as cheap as some people claim. I agree, because I can anticipate James saying that, which is onshore wind. We've banned onshore wind. That is electricity generated from British wind, from our own sources, over which we have control, and we haven't made use of it. Now, we're not going to have 100% of our electricity generated from wind, obviously, because the wind doesn't always blow. On the other hand, what we can do, when the wind does blow, we have a surplus of electricity, and we can use that surplus electricity to do things like generate hydrogen, which we can then use to generate electricity. We can use it for industry, for all sorts of uses. So we failed to take advantage of homegrown renewable energy that's under our control, British energy from British wind.
British energy from British wind. Where do you stand on all of this? Whenever we mention net zero, by the way, lots of you will get in touch and say you're furious about this net zero thing. You want a referendum on the net zero thing. Of course, this was in the Tory manifesto, for which many people voted in the 2019 election. Did you vote Tory? Did you see it in that manifesto? What I found quite interesting is a lot of people will say we need a referendum. And then the next side of the fence, they'll say things like the triple lock, that was in the manifesto, so you shouldn't be able to break that commitment. So I find that kind of manifesto conversation pretty interesting, I have to say. But I want your thoughts on that. Who's this? Gary is saying, many people, places and people will have backup generators in the event of power shortages. So worry not, Ray says. Everyone needs to cast their mind back to COVID. This is all about hysteria. You're saying you don't believe any of it. The country, you say, Ray, is a joke at the moment. Oh, harsh. Tell me your thoughts on the whole renewables thing as well, but I'm going to blow a little bit of wind into the direction of the break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about pensions, triple lock. Where do you stand on this? Should it be kept in place or not? Tell me your thoughts and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Michelle Dewberry, with you until 7 o'clock tonight. My panel, Martin Wright, who's just told me that I called him Matthew. I don't know why I called you Matthew, because I absolutely know you're Martin. But hello, Martin. And James Woodhausen keeps me company till 7 o'clock tonight. Lots of you guys getting in touch about that last conversation. Many of you agreeing with me when it comes to should you put heating on or should you just put your jumpers and your onesie on? Pretty much all of you on that comment have said that you are in the same camp as me. Onesies all the way. One of you just asked me, Michelle, I dare you to do the show tomorrow in your onesie. Let me assure you, my friend, that is a sight you really don't want to see. It's not for public consumption. I'll leave it there, shall I? Right, let's move on and talk about pensions. Why? Because there's a lot of focus and conversation on them right now, because our new Chancellor is saying that he is going to have to take, I quote, eye-watering decisions on public spending. So far, he's not going to commit to raising pensions in line with inflation as promised, even though, of course, Prime Minister Liz Truss recommitted to the triple lock. I think it was just about 2 weeks ago. Now, we're joined by Jerome Mayhew, who's a Conservative MP for Broadland. Good evening to you. I have to say, I've just been looking at my viewer inbox since the start of this programme and throughout the day, Jerome, and many viewers watching this programme are saying that if the triple lock is not respected, simply they will not vote Tory again going forward. And many of these people say they've voted Tories their whole life. What do you say to them?
Well, I know the triple lock's really important to people. It's a highly emotional subject, and our inboxes have got quite a lot on it. But I don't want to add to the flames of the speculation, because what we've got is a chancellor who's got everything on the table and nothing on the table. And in order to have the review, and we all know it's going to come out on the 31st of October, he can't confirm or deny any single policy, because if he does, then the media circus will move on to the next policy area and it will chip away at his ability to do his job. So we've just got to be a little bit patient, frustrating as it is, and stay the course until the 31st of October.
Yeah, Jerome, I've heard that sentence trotted out quite a bit today, and I have to say it makes no sense to me. I understand that you're all, saying the lines that you've been asked to, but surely if this was a policy that has been recommitted to as recently as 2 weeks ago, then why would you want people that are very afraid right now to be more anxious? Why wouldn't you want to put those people at ease?
Well, of course we don't want people to be more anxious, but Michelle, you probably watched the Chancellor's statement in the House of Commons yesterday. He is looking at economic stability as being the single most important thing that will reassure all of the people in the country, including my constituents. So the first objective is economic stability, and you can see that the statement really did work to reassure the markets. It's already reduced the long-term expectation for interest rates, which is going to have a knock-on effect on people's mortgages. It's already reduced the cost of borrowing for the government, which is going to have a knock-on effect to how much we can afford to spend on people's the services that we need, including pensions. So it is really important that we do this properly, that we follow the lead taken by the Chancellor, where everything's being reviewed. It doesn't mean to say everything's going to change. It just means that he's got to be given the space and the time to reassure the markets that we've got economic credibility, and then we get the next news of the budget on the 31st, which is just around the corner.
Yeah, my final question to you on the pension side of things, Jerome. Many of my viewers are writing in as I speak. I can see the inbox with people saying that if everything is on the table to be reviewed, given the state of the country right now, is the foreign aid budget currently being reviewed as well?
So, look, I don't want to bore everyone by repeating myself. I don't have the specifics of what's going through the Chancellor's mind, as you wouldn't expect me to. But he said very clearly on the floor of the House yesterday that he's looking at all of government expenditure. I suppose theoretically that does include foreign aid, but he's reading nothing in and he's reading nothing out. We're just going to give him the space to do the really effective job he's already done of reassuring the markets, getting that firm base of economic stability, which is the base point of any growth plan. And then he can come back on the 31st and we'll have the political arguments then as to what he can support and what needs to change.
OK, well, I look forward to those conversations on the 31st. But in the meantime, you will have seen a YouGov poll came out today. 80% of people apparently think Liz Truss is doing a bad job. Are you one of them?
No, I think what the Prime Minister will herself say is that she's made some mistakes with the mini-budget. And in fact, I met with the Prime Minister just this morning at breakfast time, and she was totally up front with that, which I really respect her for. So she recognised she made a mistake. She went too fast and too far and without enough leading the markets on the way. And so we've seen what the result has been. But the great thing is that the Prime Minister's had the courage to fix it. And we saw the impact, the immediate impact, actually, of what happened yesterday when Jeremy Hunt, the new Chancellor, stood up in the Commons. He reassured the markets, and you can look at the numbers yourself. It's had a huge and very quick impact. So that is the first step. But we've got a lot of work to do from here. So I recognise we've taken a hit as Conservatives, but we've got 2 years to demonstrate to the people of Britain that we deserve a hearing and that we've delivered over the next 2 years on all the promises that we've made, including an economic growth, which is going to pay for everything else that we want. And we need to show people that we deserve the right to be heard, and then people can make up their own minds at the election.
Indeed. Well, you are certainly being heard by us tonight. Jerome Mayhew, thank you very much for your time. That's the Conservative MP for Broadland. Right, let's get into this. Let's cut to the chase rather than waffling around the houses. Triple lock, should it be in place or not?
I fear I'm going to make myself deeply unpopular. I'll probably get lynched as I leave the studio. The issue with the triple lock, obviously, it was that pensions would rise either by 2.5% a year or by whatever average wages rose by, or by inflation, whichever was the highest.
Yeah.
Now, for quite a few years now, we've had relatively low inflation and relatively high wage growth. So pensioners have received increases well above the rate of inflation. So they've done relatively well. Now, many, but not all, by no means all, and I'm nearly a pensioner myself, so I'm speaking against my own interests here, have actually done quite well out of the boom years, relatively speaking, particularly if they own property, if they own their own house or flat. And we do have a situation now where there is a danger of young people who are still in work effectively subsidising the older people who not necessarily on their uppers. So there is kind of an argument for spreading the pain a little bit on the basis that, as I say, they have done relatively well over the last few years. They've had above inflation increases to their pensions. If you don't do something on this, what else do you cut? What do you cut instead?
Before I bring James in then, so what do you reckon then? What should happen to the pensions? Rise by what?
I think if you had something where it was, say, for the next year or the next 2 years, it would have an increase, say, on the line of average wages, something like that,
Average
rather
wage,
than inflation.
What's that, 5.4%? Yeah, 5.4%.
It would be a below inflation increase over the next year or 2 years at most, say, in order to, and it would be compensating to some extent for the fact that pensions have been going up well above inflation.
I reckon some pensioners watching this right now will be shouting at your tellies. You'll be shouting, Michelle, it was, triple lock was paused in 2019. It hasn't always gone up. And they will be saying, I can almost hear you, so I can. You've got loud voices. I reckon you'll be shouting at your tellies saying stuff like, this is not a benefit. We've worked our whole lives. We've paid into the system and now we want a decent standard of living. What do you say to that, James?
I think that's right. I think Martin's remarks confirm to me that the kind of contempt for old people that we saw in the disgraceful episode with care homes is so widespread among the guardian classes and among the liberal elite that it's very likely that Jeremy Hunt will roll back the triple lock. And the reason
you think it's unlikely?
No, it's very likely that he will stop it, right? Because he will share Martin's point of view that we've got to share out the pain, just as we've got to have the water bottle road to energy survival. We've got to, everybody's got to tighten their belts because the markets say so to our unelected Prime Minister, Jeremy Hunt. Well, I won't buy it, and I don't buy it. People voted for the Tories in, and I don't like the Tories, but if they put forward a triple lock, that is the policy that should be adopted and cannot be reversed just because the IMF, unelected, appeals to Jeremy Hunt, unelected, that, see sense, share out the pain, water bottles all round. And by the way, just because I defend old people doesn't mean that I believe what the government has done with young people is any good. The government and Liberal forces would generally like an intergenerational conflict where young people blame old people for their plight instead of blaming the government. That's extremely dangerous. Young people were given a very bad time in COVID lockdowns just as much as old people were. It was the care homes with older people. It was not having an education with younger people, and many have really suffered from that. The government couldn't, and Jeremy Hunt, demographically is between the two groups, and he couldn't really care about either of them. What he cares about is the IMF.
Do you think? So you don't think that he cares about being re-elected, keeping his job? I think there's, 12 million or so people getting state pensions right now. A lot of them would be typically Tory pensions. So you don't think that actually he's sitting there thinking, actually, I want to keep my job. I want to keep my versus suite.
Well, obviously he's got electoral considerations. But you and I know, Michelle, that when international markets with Dennis Healey or Nigel Lawson or Jeremy Hunt, when they get active, then, electoral popularity will be sacrificed and hopefully won back, as far as the Tories are concerned, by a brilliantly growing economy, which we can all rely upon in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time. It's not going to happen. By scrimping on the triple lock, you are not going to revitalise British industry. You are not going to deviate from the net zero path to oblivion. And he'll be perfectly prepared to take that measure.
Raising, by the way, average earnings as opposed to inflation will save $6 billion a year.
Well, it's peanuts.
Well, people didn't think it was peanuts when it was things like the higher tax thing, which would have done $2 billion.
Yeah, but that was peanuts as well.
Your thoughts on what he's saying, Martin?
I'm amused at the thought that, I'm flattered you think I'm part of the Liberal elite. That's rather nice. But I'm amused at the thought that Jeremy Hunt might be in hock to Guardian readers. I think they're probably fairly low down.
They love him.
Low down
they
his
love
list.
him.
I'm not sure it's a requited love, though, is it? But I think it's really difficult. One of the difficulties of being a politician at a time of economic crisis is you can't please everybody all the time. And what they're obviously trying to do, I would love to see them be able to carry on giving as generous pensions as they have been, and they're not hugely generous. I'd love to see them carry on doing that. But I can understand why they're wanting to put everything on the table, a bit like your man Jerome was saying just now, because they're doing this desperate, trying to reassure the markets, which they have to depend on because they're going to be borrowing so much money.
Well, whose fault is that? Is it our fault? Did we do the borrowing? Did we fail to build the energy supply? Did we fail to give older people the jobs that they need to maintain living standards?
Absolutely not. But
nevertheless, we should share the pain.
But they're stuck where they are.
But when you say, did we do the borrowing? No, we didn't do the borrowing, but I would say that a lot of people quite enjoyed the borrowing. A lot of people quite enjoyed being paid to sit at home and do nothing. A lot of people quite enjoyed, what was it called? Eat out, to help out, whatever it was called, their free meals. There is no such thing as a free lunch. And that side of it doesn't really get focused on so much now. But it is, we all had this period of being paid to do absolutely nothing. And those chickens are coming home to roost.
Well, it was obvious that Rishi Sunak's policy to buy more chicken every lunchtime and everything was no way to run a railroad. This is the whole discussion on energy and on triple lock is always about prices. It's about taxes. It's about benefits. It's never about the fundamentals. Are there well-paying, decent jobs for older people who are having to work much longer in their old age? Where are the industries that are going to be doing that? Are they green jobs or something? When we know that older people are not generally employed in green jobs. They're doing admin work or they're doing part-time work, but they don't have anything other than sclerotic kind of sectors to work for. And what we need is a policy for old people that can earn them decent incomes and ensure that they can enjoy the pensions that they have indeed paid for.
And that is a sentiment that is coming through thick and fast. And by the way, if you're sitting there and you're not familiar with what the state pension is, it's £185.15 per week to be precise. What do you think to that? Is that a lot of money? Many of you are getting in touch saying that man is talking nonsense. Which one? Which one? No offence either of you, by the way, but I'm not quite sure which perspective you agree with, which one you don't agree with. Lots of you there are saying, yeah, I know, I want to know, which one is it?
I think we can guess.
What, do you think it's you, or do you think it's the other one? Well, tell me if you did, because quite a lot of you have written in saying that man is talking nonsense, but I don't know who you mean. So we've got James and we've got Martin. So tell me, which one is it? Who do you agree with? What about this whole young, old thing? Is it one against the other? Is that the right way to approach it or not? I want your thoughts on that. Anne says, Michelle, oh, you're talking to me about jumpers. You're saying, Michelle, not everyone can wear jumpers. I thought you were talking to me about the pensions. You're saying a lot of people have arthritis and they can't just rely on things like jumpers or coats. No, they cannot. Mitchell says, if the Tories remove the triple lock, I will never vote for them ever, ever again. Eric says, if the government doesn't increase pensions, they are basically stealing from us pensioners. How low can they go? Who's this? Christine. I'm a pensioner who's always voted Tory. I was relying on the triple lock as promised promise, but more importantly, there is many other things that are winding me up. She says, she talks about things like illegal immigration that's happening in this country, costing everybody a fortune. And then the flip side of it is basically then you hear many social issues in this country. Apparently we don't have the money to fix it. I hear you. Keith says there's 12.5 million people in the UK on state pensions. If the Tories go back on the triple lock, those voters alone could potentially lose the election for the Tories. Steve says, when you come to wind power, we could save a small fortune if we harness all of that hot air coming from the MPs and the media. I suspect, and I hope you don't mean Dewbs and Co. You tell me your thoughts on that. Ben says a state pension should be means tested. What do you mean by that? Are you saying that everyone's contributed, if you've been working to your national insurance contributions, are you then saying that actually some people then shouldn't get their pensions or not? Tell me your thoughts. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'll have some more of your responses because I have to say lots of you getting in touch over that last segment about pensions. It's wound a lot of you up, so it has. When I come back as well, I want to talk to you about strict parenting. Are you one? Were you one? What do you think to it? Do you think that being strict is the way forward? Apparently, if you are strict, you run the risk, basically, of causing things like depression in your child in later years. Tell me your thoughts on that. Some of my panel, I can already tell, have very strong opinions. As do I. I'll see you in 2 minutes.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Michelle Dewberry, keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight. My panel, Martin Wright, is the chair of Positive News, and James Woodhousen is an author and visiting professor at London's South Bank University. Lots of you got in touch about that pensions. Some of you very unhappy with me. You're saying, Michelle, you've just told everyone you get 180 odd quid a week for your pensions. Many of you saying, we retired before 2016, we don't. We get £141 a week. You're saying, tell Michelle to correct that. Well, there you go. I do pay attention and I do listen. So sorry about that. If you are on the earlier state pension, you're quite right. £141 is what you are receiving there. Right, let's talk, shall we then, about discipline. Where do you stand on it, especially when it comes to parenting? A new study says basically you shouldn't go too far because if you're a very strict parent, your child might be more susceptible to depression. This was based on a study around kids aged between 12 and 16. And it's basically saying that, you know, if you're really strict, you can potentially rewire the DNA of your kid, cause them problems later on down the line. James Woodhousen, rolling your eyes at this. Why?
Well, first of all, I always resist the idea that, you know, we are wired. That's a metaphor taken from the electronics industry. You know, you can't compare our brains with printed circuit boards. And the second thing is that this is a species of parental determinism or infant determinism, which suggests that everything a parent does in the early years of a child's life will determine their future fate. You know, therefore, it's not the government failing to offer apprenticeships or failing to educate them during lockdown or failing to educate them at all. No, it's all the fault of parents, you know, who've messed up their children for life, and we should all feel guilty about it. You know, somebody needs to get a grip here, Michelle. It's just not the case. To change the DNA, if I'm strict with you as a child, somehow I will change your DNA and you'll end up a depressive. You know, it's completely reductionist.
So why do so many people then have childhood trauma? So say like they've been abused or whatever. If you're saying basically that if you're strict or abusive or whatever towards your child, you don't rewire them, why is childhood trauma a thing then?
Because what parents do is generally not likely to create trauma. Obviously, there's some abusive parents, and that's very bad. And, you know, it used to be the strap and the cane, and now it's something else. But I don't favour it myself as a parent, but I can tell you if I had a 6-year-old child now who threw a Coke can on the street, I'd give them a cuff across the ears. I'm on the left. Yeah, definitely.
So hang on, if your kid littered... I've got a 2-year-old, not a 6-year-old. He took an empty pack of crisps on the floor the other day in a rage because it was the wrong pack of crisps that I had the audacity to give to him. I wouldn't hit him for that. I would pick them up and say, no, no.
Well, it depends. You know, parents have the right, not the state, not, you know, therapists, but parents who are the parents of their children have the right to discipline them in a reasonable kind of way. And if you look at the litter on the streets and the cavalier attitude that young people have to it, and some oldies, then, you know, a quick correction is very definitely needed. So, you know, all this stuff about, oh, well, I say a cuff across the ears, we're not talking the strap. Do you think a cuff across the ears is going to traumatise somebody for life? Certainly not. You know, what isn't understood in all of this is that how we develop as adults isn't just a question of psychology or of DNA or stuff like that. It depends on the society we're brought up in. If the society's teaching us to be victims, then no doubt we're going to spend a lot of time in therapeutic establishments or going to Alcoholics Anonymous.
So I think it's safe to say you're having none of it. Martin, what do you think to it?
I think the fact we don't, on the whole, tend to beat our children anymore is, on the whole, a good thing.
Of course.
I'm struck by this survey. I wonder who defines strict, if it's entirely self-defined by the people answering it in the survey. I think that we have gradually become slightly more generous towards kids than when I was young. There was more of a culture of sort of, you know, don't get big-headed. You know, you don't want to praise your child or they'll get big-headed. I remember my mum holding back on praise in case I got big-headed.
Really?
So I obviously failed completely. But anyway, but on the other hand, I think there's sometimes we almost go further than we need to in the sense of trying to improve our children all the time. You know, there are parents who make sure that almost every waking hour of the child is involved in sort of improving activities, you know, playing the violin or, you know, going out to summer camp or doing baby yoga or whatever it might be. And I think sometimes we don't just allow kids just to hang out, muck around, be themselves, run around and play, get into trouble a little bit. So I'm not sure that the definition of strict necessarily makes much sense in this context.
We've got helicopter mums, we've got tiger mums.
Tiger mums, yes, exactly.
Well, hovering around their kids all the time and indulging them, basically. You know, I like kids. I'm a dad. You know, no problem.
But do you like other people's kids?
Yes, I do. I like, you know, you can't keep me away from pulling faces at babies and stuff like that. But the point is, have we got too lax, as Martin says? Have we got too paranoid about our parenting skills? And are we going to just grow up, grow up a generation of mollycoddle kids that never trip over, that never graze their knees, that never take a risk, and are just ferried around from one activity to another? It won't do.
Yeah, see, I ask you about other people's kids because I was at a museum at the weekend and it was absolutely swarming with other people's kids as well as my own, obviously. And I think I reached the conclusion, actually, I don't particularly like other people's kids because you can't tell them off when they're messing around. So they just run riot all around you.
But you can tell them off.
No, you can't tell someone else's kids off.
If somebody's going to deface a painting, like Just Stop Oil, you're going to find me in the way, whether it's a kid or Just Stop Oil.
I'm talking about like 2-year-olds. You wouldn't like go up to a 2-year-old, would you, and have a like you wouldn't clip someone else's. You wouldn't clip my.
No, you wouldn't. You'd have a word with the parent.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about this slapping thing then, shall we? Smacking. I found this really odd. So smacking your kid, it's illegal. I'm getting the wording correct. So it's illegal in Scotland, illegal in Wales, but in England and Northern Ireland, it's illegal unless it is, and I quote, a reasonable punishment, which I find really quite peculiar because who defines what a reasonable punishment is? We'd all kind of vary on that, wouldn't we? Apparently, you can't leave a mark or use an implement such as a slipper or a belt, etc.
But what about a ruler, Michelle?
Well, but this is the thing. Who defines what a reasonable punishment is? I mean, do you see what I'm saying with this? And the inconsistency. So you could, I don't know,
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those laws that we pass in order to send a signal of what we think is good behaviour rather than actually expecting to enforce it, isn't it? And you can argue whether that's a good idea, a good reason to make a law or not. But I think it's one of those laws where it's a way of saying we as society think, on the whole, on balance, it's a good idea not to whack children.
But if you look at the regulatory impulses of even the Tory government and how they're cheered on by the Guardian readers, right? It's not just a question of, yes, we've stopped beating our children, you know, we're no longer Victorians. It is rather there is no realm of private or family life that the government and the Guardian don't want to regulate. They want, even if they're not sure what is, you know, the ruler, the slap, the slipper and so on, they still want to put down a marker saying we've got something to say to you about how you do your stuff in the household. That's outrageous.
Indeed. Lots of comments on this one. Ken is basically saying what we need in society is more discipline, more strictness, and that might actually get us out of some of our conundrums, shall we say, that we find ourselves in. I've got to say, I do kind of agree with you there, Ken. Brian says, Michelle, my parents were strict, but nowhere near as strict as my teachers. He says, alas, those days have gone. Yes, they have. Trevor, you make me chuckle. You probably didn't intend to, but you say, Michelle, what about parents who have ended up depressed because of their unruly children? I hear what you're saying. John says, my child threw a tantrum the other day because I bought him a cornetto without a flake. So I took the whole thing off him and I chucked it in the bin. Oh, you sound like a match made in heaven for me. It's exactly the kind of thing that I would do. Right. I could talk about that all night long, but it's time for us to go and to hand over to someone else. So thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you at home for your company, because the someone else I refer to is, of course, none other than Nigel Farage, who's up next.
Michelle, thank you very much indeed. We're learning ever more about Jeremy Hunt. He is the ultimate globalist. He's overturned almost everything in Kwasi Kwarteng's budget. Seems to me that the Brexiteers are defeated. That's what we debate tonight on Farage, starting in a few minutes. But before that, let's get the all-important weather.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Hope you're making the most of today's fine weather, because the rest of the week looking a little more mixed. It's going to stay pretty warm, actually, but there will be spells of wet and windy weather too, courtesy of this area of low pressure that's making slow but steady progress towards us. Ahead of that, we've got high pressure dominating today, which is why most places have been fine, but we're already seeing the cloud thickening and the winds picking up in the southwest. There are still one or two very scattered showers across the far northeast. For most, though, it's a fine evening, but we'll start to see that weather front bringing some showers across southwest England into parts of Wales, and by dawn, not far away from Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, though, most places will be drier. Chillier night in the far north of Scotland, but for most it'll be warmer than last night and a really quite warm night across parts of the south. This rain could be quite heavy in the morning, some big downpours, some